join you. I wish I could be, I wish I could be with you in person. This is the best way to work, but we'll have to cover all these thousands of miles by looking at the boxes and whatever appears in them. So, yes, it's a kind of concluding moment. As I said earlier to Patricia, a concluding moment of a year's work for some, for others, including myself, many years of work, during which perhaps some of you or many of you had a chance to see a copy of the Notebooks edition number 40, entitled The Love Event, published by the London Society of the NLS, during which I had the chance and pleasure to be the editor-in-chief. Well, the work goes on, so I was thinking about what title to give to this moment of conclusion, and without much thought, Unknown Love came to mind. And then I thought that if I were to present this to you in French, I would have to make a choice with regard to the word for knowledge in French. So it would have to be either inconnu or insu. I don't know, many of you speak Spanish. I don't know if there is a similar choice in the Spanish language. There's certainly one in the Italian and a few other languages. But this choice, well, back to French, this choice would be a French affair, as I said, because it would be embedded in the body of a speaker. Maybe in addition to these two words that in Greek sound episteme and gnosis, there is one more word active in Greek, as far as I know, which is oida. Although I don't know if this is how it's pronounced, and I apologize to the Greek speakers among you if this is incorrect. But I believe that oida was the way in which it was pronounced during the times of Aristotle. But of course, we cannot be sure that these rules have been passed on to us in writing. So, knowledge remains uncertain, especially when it comes to love. This un of the unknown is a negation, and this is what makes love enigmatic, especially in relation to knowledge. How to speak about love if we don't know what we are talking about? If we didn't have the negation, on the other hand, love would sound terribly and sometimes overwhelmingly positivized, positive. It would sound perhaps almost as if it had a kind of status of an existence. Is love a name of an existence? Well, no one speaks of non-love, of unloving, except for the sociologists who wrote a book, The End of Love. Perhaps you're familiar with it. But this one, this title, this phrase, the end of love, does not concern the speaking body when it encounters love. So these are my initial introductory difficulties in what we call love, the encounter of it. We assume, because we assume, we know what we are talking about. Does the one of the mystics have a reply to this question, to the question of love? Lacan called love initially an assumption, and this is how he defined transference, love in analysis. But it's worth mentioning that he introduced his novel way of relating to transference only after he read a very eminent book by Saint Augustine called On Trinity, and I believe that was in the early 60s. Where Augustine raises the question of how to love the unknown, and he, without going too much into details, he chooses a signifier that is meaningless, and he asks, how can we love this signifier that we don't know what it means? So Lacan made transference into a supposition, or rather, transference was based upon a supposition of knowledge, a supposition of knowledge that is addressed to another. Its connection with love is only on account of speech, of speaking to the analyst. This speech supposes a knowledge of love insofar as this speech evokes and provokes what is central to speech, namely the unconscious, which is where the analyst steps in, so to speak, in his capacity as analyst, that is to say, as a whole in the unconscious. As for the transference effect, it is precisely for the analyst to emerge at the level of the signifier, as Lacan showed us in the proposition of the 9th of October 1967. In this text, you will find, shall we say, a kind of preliminary formula of transference, at the top of which you will see the signifier S with a little subscript Q standing for any. So a love effect, based on this, on what Lacan says about love in analysis as transference and this formula in the proposition, we could say that a love effect is not the same as a transference effect. The latter, as I've just said, follows from the analyst being in the position of any signifier, as in this formula in the text proposition. So an analyst can, in effect, be taken for anyone. And that's precisely the transference effect. At this point, it's worth mentioning, perhaps, we were talking about cats with Patricia, but maybe slightly less interesting animal nature can be attributed to a dog. Lacan had a dog, as you know, and he said, Lacan, that his dog was the only living creature in the world who did not take him for anybody else. So you can see that as long as transference has to pass through the signifier, through speech, the analyst is always taken for somebody else. So far, we can say that speech goes in two directions, transference and love. The former reveals the dimension of a supposition of knowledge, and the latter, well, we don't know because it is unknown and in a certain way unknowable, cannot be known. The question that emerges from these considerations is, in what way what cannot be known cannot be said? Let's come back to, I've mentioned a bit about the transference effect. Let's come back to the love effect. A love effect can be produced when the subject can hear it speak. In other words, a love effect involves being spoken. What does it mean? Well, transference involves speaking to another, in analysis called an analyst. A love effect carries a dimension of hearing which resounds as being spoken. Spoken by what? By the object I am in the fantasy for the other. This is the second function of the analyst Lacan circumscribes. So the first function I mentioned already is the signify as a whole in the unconscious. And the second function, an analyst incarnating the object A. But the unconscious, as you know, doesn't know what love is. In the unconscious, love, woman, man, cucumber, vase are just signifiers. That's why we cannot know what love is, whether it's in French, English, Greek, or any other language. We can only speak about it, in which case the difference is clear, whether we speak in French, English, and so on, assuming knowledge through speech. And when we speak about it, about love, what is spoken can only be heard behind what is said, forgotten. This is I believe, an opening statement of in Lacan's L'Étourdi. We can love the unconscious, which is what analysis teaches, at least it attempts to teach, but we don't know what love is according to the unconscious, or what the unconscious is. So do we really speak about love in analysis? It happens sometimes. In my case, it was a breakup of a very intense love relationship, which occurred due to immigration law. This is what pushed me to look for an analyst and to make a choice of one. Although the reasons and the particular qualities that he showed had nothing canine about it. By which I simply want to say that had I chosen a different analyst, the analysis would have gone a different way. What followed for many years in that analysis would have perhaps, as I said, unfolded in a different way. Well, after a series of preliminary interviews, the subject landed on the couch. Then, because of what he said in it, the analyst cut the session after about 1 minute. That was followed by the utterance, the statement, "My desire wilted." It was an agonizing moment to be kicked out from the couch after 1 minute without knowing why. Some years later, the subject uttered by chance, associating speaking, another phrase, which was, "I willed it." And at that precise moment, "I willed it" resonated with "it willed it." Suddenly, the words from the first session connected with the words uttered some years later. Three things emerge from this. It was precisely the moment when the unconscious became ethical, and subsequently a practice became possible. Two, love remained then, at that moment, beyond the radar of knowledge. It was unknown. And three, it became clear that love of the unconscious awakened in this equivocation, that was awakened in these equivocations, did not lead to knowledge about love, because the knowledge in question was the knowledge supposed. And this, in a sense, echoes Lacan's words in seminar 17, where he says that desire to know does not lead to knowledge, which is something very precise and perhaps a bit enigmatic. Transference, and with it negative transference, has its seat in discourse. Which discourse? The discourse whose aim is to retain a certain order of normalization with regard to transference and to knowledge. I am certainly not the first one to say it. And which discourse retains normalization as its dominant function? Well, it's the master discourse. The unknown love can go in the master discourse in two directions. Firstly, it can follow the master discourse as the demand from the other, when knowledge is supposed to another subject. In other words, the supposition of knowledge in the master discourse supposes reciprocity and mutuality. So what is in fact supposed in the supposition of knowledge according to the master discourse is a supposition of intersubjectivity. In other words, that my love as supposed knowledge to another is met with reciprocal response. That's what, in a sense, the master discourse guarantees. With regards to the reciprocity and mutuality, of course, it is what Lacan encountered and criticized in the IPA. In the master discourse, transference emerges as the operator of the male norm, which Lacan wrote norme mâle, where all relations are reduced to the supposition of intersubjectivity, as I said. The second direction for the unknown love emerges in an encounter with the par l'être, which is Lacan's new term for the unconscious. This new term responds to the body effects, especially at the acoustic level of the body. How does love happen at the level of the acoustic body? It works outside reciprocity. That is to say, when the supposition of reciprocity has been dropped, which is the connection between transference and unconscious, when it is dropped. We could say there is love, from this perspective, we could say that there is love before analysis, during analysis, and after analysis, insofar, and each of these marks a logical moment. And now you can see that I started in some way from the end, from the third moment, from after the end, when love that remains is no longer reciprocal. At least this is what analysis teaches. So, from the perspective of the end of the non-reciprocal logical moment, love has now become unknown. How has it come to this? How did love become unknown? In the discourse of love that follows from the logic of supposition, we speak about love all the time. We do it in the morning and at night. It is what the ancient Greeks called mania. It's a madness. Love is a madness that doesn't stop. We speak more and more about love because the sexual relation does not exist. The more we speak about it, about love, the more we make believe, which is a function of semblance, that the sexual relation exists. In other words, the more we speak of love, the more jouissance is produced. The more love, the more jouissance. We don't even need a verb to make a connection between these two. But here Lacan puts us on the spot. He says at the beginning of seminar 20, I quote, "The sign of jouissance is not a sign of love." So here we have a paradox. The more jouissance the discourse of love produces in the love discourse, the less love there is. And this touches on a paradox, that Lacan already mentions and works around it when he speaks about the love of the neighbor in seminar 7. He speaks there about production of jouissance at the time when this jouissance is to be sacrificed. And it's exactly what happened what happens in the life of the mystics, who strive to reduce and even to rid of jouissance completely, the jouissance that inhabited their bodies, precisely to make room for the love of God. And at the same time, they make room for more and more. But the more they insisted on the sacrifice of jouissance, the more this jouissance returned and stuck to their bodies. This metaphysical paradox can be found in the life of every mystic, and I would propose to call this paradox a mystical paradigm. I propose this name only because we, I believe, encounter it also in psychoanalysis. What is the foundation of this paradigm? It is that in order to start a mystical practice, to precisely with the aim to lessen the effects of jouissance, if not to rid of it, in the name of love of God, the body of the mystic has to be alive first. This is what Freud already approached in his work, in his very early work, the Project for Scientific Psychology, where he describes the libido in terms of its quantum, and where he introduces the pleasure principle by saying that, yes, you can reduce it, but a certain minimum has to stay, because if it doesn't, then we are going to die. So the mystic has to be alive. That implies that there has to be a certain quantum of jouissance below which he cannot go. How to find the love of God with that minimum of jouissance? How to have a working relationship with the signifier with that minimum of jouissance? I believe that this is precisely what Lacan called Yadelin, where there is the un, un, or the one that comes to mobilize the negation and mark the absolute minimum of the one of the signifier. By that I mean in its connection to jouissance. So there is this minimal quantum of jouissance connected with the signifier, and if reduced to the dimension of the indivisible, you have the one, Yadelin. Since I mentioned the master discourse, let me ask, what is the master? The master, according to Lacan, is the one who corrects for the purpose of keeping order. Does the analyst in his position have any interest in either keeping order or in undermining it? I would say no. The analyst is indifferent to the order. We are told the universe keeps expanding and rotating at all times. The galaxies and the planets keep orbiting, and the apples keep falling if you think of Newton. Each element, the moon has its mobile moving place in the universe. So the world, you could say, forms an order. It turns, expands, and shrinks because the order is indifferent to us. The master in the master discourse, through the master signifier, however, is not indifferent to that order, because somehow the master thinks that without him, without the master taking care of the master signifier, the world wouldn't exist, or at least it would be in disarray. When Lacan founded the School of Psychoanalysis, many obsessionals assumed the school would provide them with the place for life, like a satellite that will not cease orbiting around an artificially constructed planet. The master, therefore, according to Lacan, is a puppet of the master signifier, which implies he does not grasp or understand the function of the master discourse, making it into his home without knowing what guides his supposition that this is the place of order. The variable he ignores is what he nevertheless attempts to domesticate. The object, which is the object of his desire, that ceaselessly pulls him away from the master signifier. So you see where I'm going with this. The master follows the coordinates of the unconscious without love. A variable to this order was given to us by Lacan as a young man in his extraordinary letter to his father when he was 17, I believe, or 18, where he says with a striking lucidity that he would never submit to the authority on account of an authority for its own sake. Instead, he would first listen from where one speaks, who one addresses, and make inquiries about the laws to which both the speaker and the listener are subject. Having invented gravity, Newton became subject to it. He was sitting under the apple tree and a fruit fell. Newton did not think that perhaps it was ripe enough to make its way down and leave the tree on which it grew. He thought of the gravitational power to pull, which is a form of attraction. Another reason, back to the enigmatic aspect of love, another reason why love sounds enigmatic is that apparently it is there from the moment we are born, and even before that. Nobody knows what this starting moment is. An infant is born, and his survival, according to Lacan, depends entirely on what is called love. But what is love in the case of a just born infant? Well, it is transmitted through the cry. The cry of the born child is in some way a cry in the wild. When it is received, and most importantly, if it is received, the cry then is followed by what Lacan calls, and that's why I put it in commas, I think in Seminar 10, a backdrop of response, which means that it's not yet a response. It may be, may not, but there is a certain potential for it. So it is only when it is heard by some primitive other, if you like, that we can say that the love of the infant was received. This cry can then be transformed into a call, but only then, when the reception of the cry is passed through the dialectic of the demand and desire, and only then when this transformation happens and when the other is constituted as other, only then can the cry become a call of hunger, so on. It is impossible to know what the instant of the cry of love is. The relationship with the other as a place of the signifier supposes an unconscious. The unconscious, of course, is a hypothesis and therefore a supposition. The unconscious carries a void or a fault, and that's why Lacan marked it with a bar. Every time we cry, there is a move towards, I should say, an other, even before it is constituted. Although it is not possible to know love, as I said earlier, we speak, that's a fact, as one says in America, and we also speak of love not knowing what we are saying, when, where, and how. Speaking and knowing are therefore two different things that are, nevertheless, interwoven throughout Lacan's teaching. And I've isolated three such moments of this relationship between love and knowledge. The first one comes from Seminar 18, where Lacan asks, can I say that I know? And maybe you've come across it here and there, that when someone says, oh, I know this, there is no need to say it. It's intriguing, isn't it? That saying and knowing are connected in such a way that some subjects may find saying redundant on account of already knowing it. It is certainly to be questioned in analysis, this connection, this taking for granted this connection. So, can I say that I know? Analysis shows that subjects say they know all sorts of different things. And I have made a little list of various sayings of various subjects with this regard to knowing. The first one is, I know what will happen to me. Another one, I know this because someone told me. Next one, I know that nothing will come out of this. And another, I know I'm hurting him. And finally, I know my place. The list, of course, is very long, But what these examples have in common is that they are said, that the relationship between speech or between saying and knowing comes out through these utterances. The subject says what it knows. Lacan inserts a question here. But can I say what I know? This became much clearer in this little encounter, in his little encounter with two philosophers that he talks about in Seminar 20. As you perhaps know, Jean-Luc Nancy and Philippe Lacoue-Labarthe, two very eminent philosophers, wrote a book about Lacan in which they accused him of not knowing what he was talking about. Well, classically, Lacan responded with tact and patience that, yes, they were right. He didn't know what he was talking about because, and then he developed his response, because when he speaks, the dimension of the body is involved, the body that doesn't pass through the dimension of sense, of making sense, and of meaning. And therefore, he, in a sense, congratulated them for bringing this out. Secondly, this allowed him, which I will not approach here in detail, to give us a definition of hate. If to suppose someone to know implies some amorous relationship, to suppose or desuppose another of knowledge is an instance of hate. Later on in the same Seminar 20, Lacan makes a more radical statement where he says, love has nothing to do with knowledge. How can we account for it? So I'm coming to my third little moment from Lacan's teaching with regards to the connection between love and knowledge. And it comes from Seminar 24, where he formulates his question at a different pitch and says, so what does it mean to know? So now he includes the dimension of meaning in his question about knowledge. But, as you know, meaning entails saying, wanting to say. In English, though, apart from what do you mean or what do you have in mind, what do you want to say, there is another use or another signification of the signifier to mean. And that is, do you really mean it? And I can say that I've checked, thanks to Patricia as well, through a few languages, and we could say that this is something very idiomatic and specific to the English language, this question of, do you really mean it? And I will give you a little example. A woman asks a man, tell me that you love me, even if you don't mean it. And of course, this man who is here asked to say it to her immediately finds in it an opportunity of a lifetime to say for free what she wishes him to say. In other words, to get away with saying something that costs nothing. So, without much ado, as they say, he gladly obliges and says, yes, of course, he loves her. But no sooner does he utter these words, as a surprise, from her lands on his ears. Do you really mean it? Whoops. He didn't expect this, but it gives us a good illustration of how this verb to mean works. Precisely. We can leave to the side how the obsessional expects to get away with matters of love when it comes to such challenges. Perhaps being duped would be a good way to start with. Fortunately, the hysteric makes sure the master, the obsessional, does not get away with things, and that is perhaps the reason why Lacan invited the hysterics to his school, which was certainly his innovation in relation to the IPA, completely dominated by the obsessionals. And on top of that, as you know, he also formulated discourse of the hysteric, which is certainly a novelty. So the question in my example, the question, do you really mean it, has a huge effect on the statement, on how the statement pans out, and introduces us to the discourse. It seems that the laws of the universe are not enough to account for what is meant, for the meaning. It can only be found in the discourse. And Lacan marked this moment, do you mean it, by stating that a woman is in the position of truth for a man. What does it mean? If she castrates a man, it is where semblance and jouissance become indistinguishable. This is what Lacan says in Seminar 18. Castration, in other words, is an effect of semblance and jouissance having the same value, or, as Lacan puts it, being equivalent. Since they have the same value for a woman, when a man is asked about his love, he fails to distinguish them. It takes a woman to blur that difference. But a woman, that is to say, what exactly? Well, perhaps the following question might give us a little clue. What jouissance is there in just hearing about being loved if it is not accompanied by being meant? So if being loved, if the saying of being loved is not accompanied by this being meant, what jouissance is it? In short, for a woman, saying and meaning it, meaning what is said, go hand in hand, just like jouissance, just like semblance, where jouissance is indistinguishable from love. Meaning what is said, they go hand in hand, irrespective of what love means, what the meaning of love is, whether one is obsessional or a hysteric. The master, in turn, we could say, means well. And because of it, the master, as I said, does not understand the master discourse, because the master does not understand how he is included in it. The discourse, then, we could say, is a way to lie about the real. Lacan proposition in Seminar 24. In which case we could say there are 4 ways to lie about the real. Lacan said that each discourse wants to be the truth. I am the truth. But we could also say that with regard to the real, there are four ways to lie about the real. And that's why Lacan says, with regards to those four ways of each discourse wanting to be the truth, he says that the master discourse is the least true discourse, by which he means the most impossible. What does it mean? It means that its claim to the truth, the master discourse claim to the truth, is by far greater than in any other discourse. And that's why the master discourse is organized as an order or a set of statements based on the representational value of the signifier. And perhaps we could say that no other discourse promotes this representational value of one signifier being substituted or represented by another, to another signifier in this way. If this is not enough, there will be more coming from the question, do you really mean it? So I would propose that this is how we could approach the encore from the perspective of the English tongue. The excess, the more in the body, lies in the following. When we say, we mean it. Who knows what we want to say when we speak about love? But, well, irrespective of what we mean, when we say it, we mean it. But the dimension of encore is Lacan's precisely Lacan's dimension of meaning what we say. This is perhaps to do with a certain dramatic effect that I would link to the Christian drama rather than to the Greek one. So, what does it mean to know? I mentioned briefly 3 moments in Lacan's teaching that mark his approach to love. One, the conjunction saying and knowing with regard to the transference effect and the supposition of knowledge. The second moment, saying and not knowing with regards to the critique of Lacan, accused of not knowing what he was saying. And 3, the meaning of love in relation to, not to signification, but to meaning it when one speaks of loving another. And that's the point where Lacan, again, to say it again, says that love has nothing to do with knowledge. So, in other words, love keeps slipping, keeps running away from the knowledge. Now, moving on, these 3, I want to introduce something new. These 3 little threads are interwoven with the term that Lacan introduces rather late in his teaching, and the term that underlies our intimate relations with language, whose structure is borne out by the unconscious. And this term is la langue. Let's say with Lacan that language is an embroidery on la langue. The saying of love that allows for a move between discourses can be situated in the master's understanding he is being played and duped. Grasping his dupery makes him a subject of the representational value of the signifier in the discourse of the master. Today's politics, for example, can just say that today's politics no longer relies on this representational value of the signifier. And this is, in a sense, what Lacan already anticipated, I believe, when he introduced what in Seminar 24 he calls a new signifier, namely the real. Lalande was not given, I think, enough attention in the earlier part of Lacan's teaching. I think we don't treat it seriously enough today. Most of the Lacanian schools today are embedded in the intimate relationship with Lalande. I don't mean by that there is some common language spoken by the community of members, which of course is a different matter. I mean an intimate relationship by every single speaking being, and among them members of analytical community or schools, with his or her maternal tongue. So, and this beautifully vibrating Lalande echoed in my ears, and a little proposal emerged that we could translate it or transliterate it perhaps as tatang, because that's what it's about. It means nothing. It means nothing, but it sounds. Lalande, tatang. Well, just an idea. So let me give you an example of how we could have an idea of what this Lalande is. A subject recalls from his early childhood memory, when he was speaking to his mother, he asked her a question: where does my mother tongue come from? And she replies, all languages come from your mother tongue, your maternal tongue. Not mother tongue, because mother tongue is something different. Well, he didn't comprehend it then. He went on to study linguistics. Maybe that would help. It didn't. But having spent many years in analysis, he finally came to a certain position where he was able to grasp that it is the case that the basis, the foundation of what we call mother language is maternal language or maternal tongue, la langue maternelle in French. And as I said, this has to be distinguished from what in some languages is called mother tongue. In other languages, it's called father tongue or paternal language. Because in this case, the subject's mother, it was not about the sounds, all sorts of sounds that she was able to emit, produce, that he remembered, but it was to do with the language effects on his body. So la langue or tatang is a tongue in which a body is inscribed and to which his ear was calibrated, the subject's ear is calibrated. It is, we could say, bits and pieces of language that happen in between what is said, in between the rules of grammar, in between what makes sense, everything that in a sense forms a certain matrix, certain materiality of the letter, even before it becomes constituted as a signifier that, in effect, in contrast and in relation to another signifier, produces what is called a sense effect. So Lacan returns to the question of la langue after the seminar of choice, which is seminar 24. Before Joyce, in his famous text, The Position of the Unconscious, he defines the unconscious as that we say. The unconscious is what we say, 1966. But then, after Joyce's seminar, Lacan returns to the Freud's term, German term for the unconscious, which is unbewusst. And instead of translating it, because it already was translated, he hears it. He hears it as unbevu, unbewusst, unbevu. Whoops. He reminds us that the non-dupes err. With this resonating effect, we are immediately, we could say, just to illustrate it, catapulted from the master discourse that is dominated by the semantic order guarded by the master to the analyst discourse that supports being spoken and being heard, to which Lacan gives a value of this new signifier that he introduces as a new signifier, in seminar 24. It is the real that the analyst embodies, subsequently we could say, to the extent that it becomes indistinguishable from semblance. So this dimension of truth as a woman that I mentioned earlier is somehow incorporated into this position, analyst position, as a semblance, where truth and real are going hand in hand, are conjoined. So we could say that the analyst obeys the truth as a certain variety of what is heard. And as I mentioned earlier, it's the truth as a woman. Now, when I say obey, let's just make a little digression that to obey, obedience comes from the Latin obaudire, which means to hear, to give attention to listen to. So in some languages, this term obedience comes up as ambiguous and having these significations, but in English, perhaps we can stress it a little, that to obey, first of all, means to obey in the dimension of hearing. The title Lacan gave to that seminar 24, I keep referring to it as 24 because it's untranslatable. In this seminar, he breaks away with the semantic tradition to which, as he says in this seminar, we cling. It is on that basis that Lacan says that religion has a future, which is a future of meaning, a fixed meaning, or even a variable meaning. Did he mean it when he said it? Or was it to warn us and to sensitize us to not trying to bridge a feeling and a meaning? Feeling concerns the impossible to say. Meaning, on the other hand, muffles the impossible as the master discourse shows it. So, back, or to give you the title of the seminar 24, I'm sure you're familiar with it, L'insu que c'est de l'une bévue, c'est amour, c'est amour. as Dan Collins, who translated it, not the only one as far as I know, proposed, and this is how we could hear it. We could hear it in three ways, perhaps in more ways. The unknown that knows, that's love. Or love is the failure of one blunder. Or the unknown that knows the whoops of love. So, is chancing the real as the new signifier a success of the unconscious or its failure? I think it is a triumph of la langue. It is a triumph of the blunder and of the unbewhoopsed, which could be read and heard as unbeknownst. This triumph, which at the end of analysis translates into, let's say, a certain happiness, in the sense that it happens, makes the passion of ignorance at that point all the more reliable and operative. In analysis, if analysis succeeds in causing la langue on which the second language is but an embroidery, then ignorance would be contributive to a new love for the unconscious as la langue. And I left it as I wrote it. It's clearly a blunder, having written new with a K before. We'll make of it whatever. The unknown love is said in fragments of la langue. The resonances, the tonality, equivocations are specific to the signifier running away, not only from the meaning to which we are glued, to which we cling, but also from the foreign language. The semantic order that dominates the subject's life, making his search for the original language, has its limits in what is heard and in what in this hearing is obeyed. And just reminding you about this obeyed, heard proximity. Analysis in the English language does not favor intimacy of the signifier's links with jouissance, but as Serge Cotet proposed, it favors links with the thing. I'm referring to a text by Serge Cotet, kindly mentioned to me by Sanem, Eulogy of Analysis in a Foreign Language. The scope for ambiguity dwindles proportionally to wanting to say, to be understood. If the language in analysis is also foreign to the analyst, the meandering of associations promotes the descriptive mode of the signifier rather than its sonorous dimension. This generates room for translation that supports meaning. Is that the cat? Yes. In short, analysis in a foreign language follows closely the sense effects and is sensitive to meaning and therefore to understanding or to being understood. Can we say, it's a question, can we say here that the supposition of knowledge, back to the definition of transference, addressed to another subject, in this case the analyst, becomes a subject to understand, a subject supposed to understand? Only analyst silence sends us back to the precariousness of the signifier and its resonances. And I'll just mention briefly a moment with regards to the emergence of the voice, a moment in the history of 20th century after the uh, invention of the radio in 1900. There was this instance we could observe in a particular there's a particular episode in German history in 20s and 30s when whole families gathered on a Sunday to listen to the voice of the Führer. This was the effect of how the voice was, in a sense, extrapolated from the background of meaning and how it became dominant. So these resonances as a counterpoint to meaning effect, they obeyed the voice in a sense as inseparable from meaning. Nobody realized then that the obedience in question carried a certain identification that Lacan tried to separate from love as a contingent event. The subject who hears that all languages derive from the maternal tongue derives his knowledge through identification with his mother, who is also a woman. So I'm moving on another step on the theme of mother-woman. As you know, Lacan made a huge effort to separate the mother from the woman, despite admitting that the latter succumbed to the effects of contamination of the former. A year later, Lacan will say in Italy, at a talk he gave there in Rome in 1974, that although the mother is the one who loved us, who fed us, who cleaned us, she only did that because she loved the woman in the first place. You will find this text, by the way, which we owe to Catherine Millot in the edition of the psychological notebooks I mentioned, number 40. Miller's intuition on the mother tells us that she is the one who has. So the mother is to be approached as the one on the side of having. And therefore, she has the capacity to give, to remove the phallic value from her objects. This proposition of the mother as having, as a phallic woman, implies that she, the mother, is the one who knows, who is almighty, as Lacan says in Seminar 4, and all-knowing. The mother to whom knowledge is supposed. If the maternal other remains the source of the signifier with which the subject is marked, then what is crucial for the subject is to suppose the beyond of the mother. In this Rome talk, Lacan proposes that mother can only become a mother and therefore a carrier, we could add, of the mother tongue, of the maternal tongue, as a source of the new signifier if she loves the woman. And he concludes precisely in that text by Catherine Millot, who was there at the talk, the transcription of that presentation of the talk by Lacan was lost. So there are only notes of those who attended his talk. So Lacan concludes in that presentation by proposing a new formulation. A woman is loved. And this is what interests me in terms of the relationship with Lalande and how this Lalande emerges, although it is linked to the maternal verbal connection and how the body of an infant is marked. There is somewhere a woman beyond that or next to it, to this relationship. The mother-woman connection is, it seems to me, essential for us to speak about the unknown love, precisely in relation to femininity, the unknown love in relation to Lalande. And I recall Fabian Feinwax saying somewhere that one can only love from the feminine position. But of course, this has nothing to do with the biological sex. So when we approach love in this way, that is to say, from the experience of the speaking being, we can propose a connection between la langue, tatung, and the feminine jouissance. What kind of connection? It's a connection that seems more striking in the case of those speaking beings who have had their analyses in a foreign language. This is more or less a proposition of Serge Cotte in his text. Is la langue connected to the phallic jouissance, or is it rather embedded in the jouissance as such? Language is what we try to know concerning the function of la langue, Lacan says in Seminar 20. Even with regards to communication on the scientific level, the discourse of science, which is the master discourse, attempts to give an account of la langue. In other words, not all of the unconscious accounts for a variety of affects in speech that remain enigmatic. Lacan states that these affects are the effects of what in the transmission of knowledge goes amiss. Some of these effects, he says, go much further than what the speaking being sustains by way of knowledge. So we could say that the unconscious knowledge is not all that affects la langue. This not all of the unconscious has a very particular manifestation in analysis in the foreign language, where this second language inhibits and blocks in some way the la langue effects as connected to the maternal tongue. Speaking in a foreign language is particularly prone to the production of sense, as I said, to wanting to be understood, the supposition to be understood. And this may be an orientation for an analysand for a long time. It may include all the coordinates of analysis, like the symptom fantasy, the lost object, trauma, the feminine. But in the course of associations, the production of sense will, and in the course of association, the production of sense will predominate over an encounter with the signifier outside meaning. And this is the key to the affects produced by la langue and the key to the jouissance beyond phallic. Once the sense production is dropped, well, not all at once, so is with it the phallic jouissance that feeds on sense in the sense of jouissance, in the sense of enjoyed meaning or enjoyment. What is left remains in the hands of tonality and poetry of speech embedded in the syntax of la langue. Syntax which accounts for and supports this connection where a new jouissance awakened in the body emerges. Maybe it's not too clear. Once we have a certain separation of meaning effects and the sonorous effects of the signifier, the latter and the new relationship between, let's say, on the verge of sense includes a certain effect of tonality and of poetry that is embedded in the syntax rather than in semantics or grammar. Syntax being directly linked to la langue. This new jouissance, I call it new jouissance, is therefore conjoined with the signifier outside translation, because translation is dominated by sense, by meaning. So perhaps at the end of analysis, every analysant, every speaking being writes their own singular wake, not a Finnegan's Wake, because this one was already written by Joyce, but a certain wake of la langue's wake, if you like, the wake of Tatin, and or what is born into speech through this awakening effect, awakening to the sound of la langue. The fall of meaning subsequently results from the fall of the belief in the sexual relation, to which the meaning effects are very closely connected. Once a belief in the couple supporting the sexual relation becomes superfluous, the distinction between the masculine position embedded in, as Eric Laurent put it, fantasy involving a partial object, the feminine position can be logicized. The latter one, the feminine position, derives, as Laurent says, from privation as a condition of jouissance, as inconsistent, incomplete, and infinite. There is, in Laurent's words, no organic localization to the feminine jouissance. Even if a phallic value can be attributed to the woman and turn her into a mother, privation is the condition of this attributive capacity. This is where we find Lalande and where Lacan gives full attention towards the end of his teaching to it. Although this Lalande, there is an attempt to normalize it, to order it, to give it an order, to give it a certain, let's say, aspect of normalization by phallic jouissance. Nevertheless, Lalande and its jouissance remain unregulated and proximate to shame. And I mention shame because there is this intriguing remark by Lacan, who says in Seminar 24 that Lalande is obscene. It can be obscene. It is perhaps the only real obscenity that we treat with love. It can lead to knowledge and to everything we attribute to love on the side of knowing it. And this knowledge of language remains a contingent awakening to the music of an unknown love. So I finish with the question: does analysis provide a passage from the endless generation of meaning, sense production, that the structure of the master discourse supports and feeds, to a love of Lalande that is loved by everyone because it means nothing? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bogdan. That was what a treat to listen to this and to take us from seminar to seminar and focus on seminar 24. We have about 5 minutes. I wonder if someone has a question, an intervention, a comment.
If no one has a question, I have a question. So thank you very much. Very layered and organized and precise. And something that is very interesting is that you never mention love is giving what one does not have to someone who does not want it, which is a very commonly quoted phrase. But at the same time, it seems to me that your presentation is connected at different levels with that. So can you explain whether there's some connection between your presentation and the commonly quoted quote about love?
Well, I haven't thought about it. So I understand that you can hear the connections. Well, it's a completely different, as you know, chapter in Lacan's teaching, where the gift of love as what one doesn't have is connected to castration, to a gift of something I lack. I have to say that the connection is not at all obvious to me, and that I wouldn't perhaps try to make such a connection, because in a sense, as a connection because it comes from Lacan, but why I am hesitating to make any other connection to it, because precisely in the later teaching of Lacan, he seems to revise what he says earlier about love, what he says about castration, what he says about the lack. And I think his approach is more on the side, more aligned with this new signifier, the real, that invites us to approach love in a completely new way. But in a sense, your question links to perhaps that little moment in the life of an infant where when through the cry, through the scream, it becomes, let's be optimistic, let's say that there is that this cry is received. When it is received and when it becomes subject to a very slowly to a dialectic of the demand, this is perhaps precisely the moment when and then when this dialectic transforms the cry into a call, so let's say a cry out of tension is then through the introduction of the other transformed into a call of hunger. This is perhaps the moment when there is a gift of what one doesn't have. A gift of a call, but not on the side of the cry. Because the cry is where the real and the signifier are connected in this desperate moment of survival. It is a matter of survival. But in this process of transformation, a call, a dialectic of the demand allows for, I think, that gift of one doesn't have to be transferred, to be conveyed.
Thank you.
Can I jump in?
Yes, go.
Thank you, Bogdan. This was beautiful. Thank you so much. And maybe we can read it later too. I only heard it. When I was hearing it, I followed your first sentence when you said, if I were to speak in French, I was wondering whether it is inconnu or l'insu. And so I tried to follow that throughout your presentation. And what came to me in the end is that maybe Lacan's teaching also like carried us from the inconnu to l'insu, that the love does not exist, or it came not to exist as inconnu, but it does have the possibility to exist as l'insu. And that is what partially comes out apparently at the end of analysis, one by one, where each finds their relationship to love in the form of l'insu. And I'm hearing it when, for instance, when you're talking about the dimension of speech that is in the body, right? I mean, that is unknown. The body is unknown. You mentioned so many times the words effect. Effects of love, effects of meaning. And I think that is incredibly precious, because that is what, like when reading Seminar 24, Miller, Laurent, they all talk about the effects of transference, effects of love, rather than love, talking about the effects. Why? Because it's the tatang that we hear, maybe in all of it. So I don't have a really a question in this. I'm just I'm trying to show my appreciation. And also also it's a partial solution of a question for me when at the end of Seminar 20, when Lacan is trying to read love through contingency and encounter. And I think
Exactly.
that it is here that it is in the dimension of not the unknown, but it's in the dimension of the l'insou.
Well, I will just say that perhaps we are slightly spoiled by this distinction between savoir and connaissance. Spoiled in the sense that it makes things a bit easier, precisely as you reiterated it. So I tried to just stick to this unknown, maybe a little bit as an experiment where it would take us. And I think that where it takes us is precisely it kind of allows us to leave the dimension of knowledge, not as the sort of primary dimension in the question of love, but precisely it allows us to go somewhere else. Firstly, to la langue, secondly, to the contingent dimension. So in a sense, once we realize that there is no other word, unknown, that's it, then all sorts of things can open up.
Then we can play.
Then we can play.
Exactly.
Dan, do you have time for one more question? Alexandra. So nice to see you, Alexandra.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. I try to be short. Thank you so much for bringing in discussion the signifier privation. When you said that the mystical experience is an experience of privation, and paradoxically, it comes to kind of feminine jouissance. So my question is about this idea that less is more, that instead of phallic jouissance of consuming objects, jouissance of the master, there is the possibility of this feminine jouissance. And if you consider that, for instance, ascesis, so privation can, as a practice, just letting go things, can be kind of way toward this feminine jouissance. In our very consuming of everything and everywhere culture we live now. Thank you so much.
Well, just one word to respond, maybe. Yes, provided that we do not rid of phallic jouissance by way of sacrifice. Because that's precisely, I think, what is at the core of Lacan's paradox from Seminar 7. That the more you insist on ridding of it, the more you try to sacrifice it in order to obtain something in that place, the more you just push jouissance around, so it changes places, it goes from here to there, but it doesn't change in terms of quantity.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Very good question.
Bogdan, would you take the last one?
Sure.
Promise? Okay, Shari, can you go ahead?
Yes, Bogdan, thank you so much. I mean, that was just brilliant. And just to kind of keep it brief and to stay with where you ended, this question you posed, which I wish I could read word for word, but it was something about, and maybe I'm conflating a couple of details at the end, the music of an unknown love, because it means nothing. Okay, so the music of an unknown love in the prior paragraph, and this idea of because it means nothing, which so richly takes me to certain lines in Seminar 24, and I'm so grateful that you took up so many moments and so many details there. but when he speaks of love as empty and as an empty word, you know, like wanting, it seems to open it up to allow what cannot be known. I mean, you also spoke of, so importantly, the inconsistent, incomplete, infinite, right? All of this cannot be, cannot work with syntax, right? And that was also, or it's a different kind of syntax, you know, the tonality, musicality, the sonorous, and I love a move to Tatang. So I thank you. I thank you for the whole talk. It was just fantastic to listen to you and to, for me, it was very, it was resonant with like lots of different details that I'm, you know, with others taking up right now in Seminar 24. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you for a very intriguing remark. Thank you.
So on behalf of Initiative Toronto, we thank you many times. I hope you'll hear the rhythm in thank you and the music in thank you. It was a pleasure to have you, to listen to you, and to read you, and to read together with all of you. We hope to see you again as our guest. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you for our last encounter on the 29th, I believe. Carlos, can you remind us? Is it the 29th or the 26th? The 26th, I believe. Well, I'll see you then for our video.
Yes, the 26th.
New Forms of Love, and then we end with that. And Carlos will take us to a great documentary. See you then, and have a great weekend.
Thank you very
Bye.
much,
Thank
Patricia.
you.
Thank you very much
Thank
for
you.
Bye, Bogdan. Thank you.
working with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Bogdan.
Thanks.